Lord, you know.
You will now listen to
Is the best.
And when you look at the Gettysburg Address, there's elements of the gospel and uses it in the Gettysburg Address. I mean, the whole idea of the new birth of freedom comes out of born again. And in that, you start to see him moving towards talking about things like salvation. There's the mercy of God. There's the grace of God. And by the time he gives his second inaugural address, you see that there's elements of mercy and there's elements of grace in what he was saying.
Gettysburg's battlefield becomes a classroom for Christian courage, spiritual warfare, and leadership as Pastor Cliff Whitehead connects Civil War stories, Lincoln, Scripture, Job, and 9/11 to eternal perspectives. Are you ready to fight the good fight of faith?
Hello, and welcome to Plays on Word Radio, where we discuss, analyze, work, and play on the Word of God. Thank you for joining us on this excursion today. Let's join Pastor Teddy, also known as Fred David Kenny Jr., the founder of Plays on Word Theater, as he does a deep dive into the Word of God.
Let's welcome the General Cliff Whitehead to Plays on Word Radio. You are a veteran of our radio program here. You've been on before, and it was one of our highest rated shorts that we ever did was one that you did about Gettysburg. But
Okay.
I just wanted to say hello to you first of all, and welcome back to the radio program. Now, the reason that reaching out to you is because Pastor Cliff of Fellowship Chapel is doing a 3-day, 2-night conference titled The Good Fight of Faith in Historic Gettysburg.
Yes.
And I'm telling you, if you haven't been on a Gettysburg trip with General Whitehead, man, you haven't been on a Gettysburg trip. You know, it's life-changing, thought-provoking, and just overall fantastic experience. So this is coming up, if I'm not mistaken. The date is September 24th through the 26th.
Yes. Yep.
Oh, that's a good time to go to Gettysburg, man.
Yeah, good time of year. Yeah.
Man, I'm contemplating if I can make it. I don't know. I'm trying to see what I can do to make that happen.
We want you there.
I'm telling you, but there's that period of time. It's so nice because it's cooler in the morning and in the evening.
Yes.
And it's nice during the day. It's like, nice and warm.
Yeah.
It's
And
just
you were one of the originals.
Oh yeah,
The original.
That's right. I remember and I tell you, one morning we went out and this fog came in. It was the eeriest fog. It was about 6 feet high, maybe 5 or 6 feet high. This cloud cover that just came over the ground. And I was like, man, this is bizarre here, man, especially after the stories that we went through. Tell us about this retreat that's coming up. And then you have another one in November.
Right.
So I wish I was, part of me still wishes I was up north because I'm like, man, I would love to go to both of these, man. But maybe you can, if I can't make it, maybe you can give us a report from there. Yeah,
certainly.
Tell us about these retreats here.
Yeah. The first one, the Good Fight of Faith Retreat Conference, that's something we began in 2005. Okay, so we've been doing that for over 20 years. And what we do in that one is, the vision of it is to, in other words, equip the saints, right, for the spiritual battle. And the idea is we go out there and we learn about the battle itself, the history of the battle. And then we do spiritual warfare teachings from Scripture at night, using the battlefield as an object lesson. And we also see it as like kind of a mission field for people who just like history to come on the trip, and they'll hear the gospel, of course, because one of the things we do on the battlefield I've collected over the years quotes from the soldiers, actual quotes from them, from their diaries and so forth. Soldiers on both sides. There are born again believers on both sides of that battle. And I share those quotes and some of their testimonies on the battlefield and or at night when we're doing the teaching. And it's just powerful to hear their testimonies, their faith in Christ, how it was not only helping them in the physical battle, but of course the spiritual battle that we're all in.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of what that trip is. Like I said, that was the very original one. And we've done over 20 of them now, battlefield tours. And so that's basically the core of that trip.
Can I
And then
can I just add one thing to that? That was the spiritual warfare aspect. We would be on the battlefield during the day, and then at night we would study spiritual warfare tactics, and it was, to this day, it is one of the most impactful ministries that have ever run into my being, as far as made an impact on my life. And I can't recommend it any higher. I mean, it is such a fantastic trip, and it was so eye-opening. And to this day, I'm still I try to give you citation when I can, but I'm still quoting Cliff, stuff that I learned on the Gettysburg retreats to the fellowship that I pastor. And as much as I can, I'm like, well, I got this from Cliff Whitehead. I try to give, but sometimes I'm just going along and I find myself saying, "What? I got that at Gettysburg, man." So I just wanted to let the people know, and this is the type of retreat that you don't forget. It's not like you go on a retreat and you forget it like a vacation. This is the type of retreat that ministers. It's still ministering to me 20 years later. I went in 2000. I want to say 2006 or 7, I think, and I might have been 07, and it's still ministering to me.
Yeah, one of the things, Ted, I found out is in other words, we've had over the years a high percentage of people at least come back a second time, some a third.
Yeah, you got to.
And I think what a lot of it is, people have a hard time imagining what it's like. But once they see it and how impactful it is to be in the locations that these soldiers were, and you hear their words and you hear their stories. And then, of course, Scripture speaks for itself. That's the most powerful testimony.
Yes.
And you combine those, and it's quite an experience, so.
Yeah, absolutely fantastic. And I do owe you an apology for giving you such a hard time about Jeb Stewart. We'll get into that. We'll get into that a little bit later. So
I was out to dinner the other night with some people, and they brought up the Gettys. They were asking me about it. And I got to share with them one of my favorite stories, because it's almost like as the more years we do that particular retreat, stories get added to it. And my absolutely favorite add-on, and I share it now, it's now part of the tour. And it was so impactful and so touching. It was about our 4th or 5th trip. And I know you knew Al and Jeannie Braca. And Al, of course, died in the 9/11. He was in one of the towers, worked for Kenneth Fitzgerald, and he was a believer, strong believer. And when the planes went into the building, he was in a conference with, people in his office and so forth. And the plane went in below them. So they couldn't get down, they had to stay up there. So when we were going across, Jeannie Braca was on this trip. This was about 2006, 2007. The third day we traced the Pickett's charge to the Union lines.
I love it.
And you remember the part where the Confederates are heading towards the wall and they're coming under heavy fire and they stall.
Yes.
The charge stalls it. And the whole key to a charge like that is to keep moving, kind of like to break open in the line, steamroll it, if you will. And the Confederates were stalled. And General Armistead, and there's a famous picture of him, drawing of him, artist rendition of this. He takes his hat off his head, puts it on his sword, and gets in front of his men and says, "I'm going over that wall. Who's coming with me?" And about 100 to 150 of them follow the general over the wall. They do penetrate the Union line. Yeah. And of course, they'll get repelled. But when I was there with Jeannie Braca, and we were walking together in the group, when I told her that account, she just stopped. And she said, "That reminds me of Al." And then she related the story, of course, that she heard through people, I guess phone calls had left that office and so forth. that when Al knew there was no escape from up there, he got up on the conference table and he said, "I'm going to heaven. Who's going with me?" She said, and and I tell that story now, and what a testimony that is, right?
Yeah.
And to share that is just so impactful. And here's a woman whose husband had that courage and bravery to think of the bigger picture, right? When life was on the line.
Yes, it's, oh my goodness, it's just, and as you were speaking, it all came back to me. I remember that, and also just the bravery of a lot of these characters.
Oh yeah, yeah.
The selfless bravery. I forget the guy who said he got an order and he was like, "You got to go something." I think near the fish hook. I think, and he says, "It's murder, but it's an order." And he's like, "Let's go. Let's go." And they actually went, and it was absolutely amazing to me. I was just like, the bravery that these guys had.
Yeah, I remember you quoting that a lot. Yeah, that was over at Culp's Hill.
Yes, a Culp's Hill. That's it. Culp's Hill. Yeah, that just made an impact on me. It made it's an order. I don't necessarily agree with it or subscribe to it, but it's an order. So let's do it. It's an order. I have to carry out my order. My orders are more important than my will. And I'm like, what? That needs to be applied from a Christian perspective. Like when we don't think when we don't necessarily agree with what God has us doing, but if he's called us to do it, do it.
Right. Like in other words, that general that gave that order, he's not infallible, but his orders still needed to be obeyed. Right.
Yes.
And now our ultimate general is perfect in his orders.
Yes.
And so how much more must we say? I don't understand it, but it's an order.
Right. It's just, and these are the type of things that you get on this trip. So I completely, wholeheartedly encourage everybody who's listening, if you can go on this, we're going to put the links in the show notes so you can find out. There is a website that Cliff has set up for this specifically, fighting the good fight. And
it's called the. Can I give the? I'll give the address.
Yeah.
Goodfightoffaith.org.
Goodfightoffaith.org, and that will be in the show notes in case you're you're worried about spelling it wrong. You'll be able to click on it. It'll be on the show notes, and absolutely check it out. It's beyond worth it. If that makes sense, it's beyond. It's better than worth it. I don't know if that is a negative type thing, a positive, but it's such a fantastic experience, and it's a life-changing experience. Anyone that I know that went on it, every single person I know that went on it, there was never one person that said that was a waste of time, or I did not learn something from a historical perspective and a spiritual perspective. The best part for me, I don't want to say the best part, but one of the great things for me is Cliff knows where all the dead bodies are. Like listen, you can go with a national parks type of guide and somebody that the national park appoints or whatever, and they're going to take you and say, this is where the Gettysburg Address happened, and this is blah blah blah. Nah, when you go with Cliff, he's like, this is where they tell you it happened, but let me show you over here. And it is like going somewhere with somebody who grew up in that area, or, who knows where everything is, man. And it just the impact of that and the historical lessons. I can't tell you how many Gettysburg books I have right now. I have and after going on the tour with you a bunch of times, the books they light up a totally different way. Totally different way. Was it the wheat field where they were walking on dead bodies? It was
20-acre space of ground that traded hands 5 or 6 times, where they just Union captured it, then the Confederates captured it. But after about 2 hours fighting, there were 6,000 casualties. And one of the observers back then said you could walk across the field without touching on bodies, without touching the ground.
And the horses too. Horses.
Yeah, they're dead horses. Yeah.
Let me ask you a historical question before we continue with the rest of what you're doing. I'm going to play I'm going to play Roy Larson advocate right now. And why is the Battle of Gettysburg? Why is that even important? Why is I'm a know nothing citizen? I don't know anything. I didn't pay attention in history class or whatever.
Yeah.
Why is the Gettysburg? Why is the Battle of Gettysburg? What is significant about that?
Okay, good question. Some historians will say it's the turning point of the Civil War, but I would agree with the historians that say it is a turning point. There are other turning points as well. Happening at the same time that this battle was going on was the Battle of Vicksburg. Grant was out in the West fighting, and that was the stronghold of the Confederates out in the West. But one of the reasons that Gettysburg is probably the most significant battle of the Civil War happened about midway in the Civil War. And pretty much from the very beginning of the war in 1861, the Union pretty much controlled all the battles in the West. They won most of the battles in the West. It's a different story in the East, particularly when Robert E. Lee took over command in 1862 of the Army of Northern Virginia, which included other Confederate states. That was what it was called, the Army of the Northern Virginia, because that's where most of the battles were fought. And he was able to defeat a number of generals. And again, with less men, less munitions, South had less factories. They couldn't reproduce their weapons or produce their weapons as quickly or as many. They had less men. But he pulled off victories against Union generals who had many more men and munitions. You kind of look at the strategy of the Civil War. The Union had to conquer the South to keep them from leaving. The Confederate strategy was not to conquer the North. They knew they couldn't do that anyway because they didn't have enough men. The idea was to prolong the war long enough that the North grew battle weary, and they said, "Oh, let's settle with the South. Let them just go. We've lost too many people, too many men, and so forth." Yeah. So Lee, when he came north to fight up in Gettysburg, he felt, because he knew that the political tides were turning in the North. You had the Peace Democrats in the North who were against Lincoln, and they were talking about, let's end the war. They weren't so much anti-slavery, the Peace Democrats. They were more against the war. Right. Okay, so they just wanted to let the South have their terms and go, let's end this war. It's hurting us economically. We're losing lots of young men, and so forth and so on. And Lee understands that. And after his last battle down in Chancellorsville before Gettysburg, where he pulled up this big upset victory. He's outnumbered 2-1, right? And he wins this victory. But he knows he has to do more than that. Like he writes to Jefferson Davis and he says, we can't afford any more of these victories. And what he meant was that even though he won, he suffered lots of casualties. Yes. So did the North. But the North could replace the men.
He couldn't.
So he says, so he wants to get Jefferson Davis's permission to go north, to invade the North, with the idea of winning a big victory up maybe near the Harrisburg area or near Philadelphia or close to Washington, D.C. And if he wins a major battle against the main army of the Potomac, the Union Army of the Potomac, in Northern Territory, the political pressure, Lincoln's not going to be able to survive. Then the Democrats are going to get a lot of support because people in the North goes, hey, look, we don't want it coming up here,
He was playing 3D chess, basically. He was playing chess. Yeah, he was like, okay.
So that was the idea. So now, if he wins up here, that could have changed the whole. Lincoln this is 1863. Lincoln was running for re-election in 1864.
Election, yeah. Oof.
And you know how war can change. A war that drags on can change even supporters against the president.
Yeah.
Unless they're hardcore supporters, they'll, sometimes switch at that point. You see what happened with Vietnam, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
yes.
with Johnson. And so that was why it was such a significant battle. And it was the first time that Lee suffered a major defeat.
Right.
And so
he trained all these other generals that he was fighting against. He was their instructor. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
He was there. He was there at West Point. He was He trained all these guys and led a lot of them in what was it? What was the war before that? Was it the Mexican American War? I forget the 20 years before. He led a lot of these guys. Already led them, and so he ran circles around them.
Yeah, and he did, and he knew them, and he knew guys like McClellan and Joe Hooker.
How about
glory
Burnside?
hounds,
How about Burnside?
Well, not so much him, but yeah, he knew Burnside. But someone like McClellan was more afraid to lose than he wanted to win, because of his reputation and so forth and so on. So he knew how to use that.
Yeah.
Now, when Meade gets assigned to be the head general of the Army of the Potomac 3 days before Gettysburg, as Lincoln fires Hooker.
Yeah, right.
And appoints Meade. And Meade was not like a flashy general. He was a no-nonsense type guy, not charismatic in any way or shape or form. And when news gets to Lee, one of the Confederate officers come in, and we just received news. He said that Hooker has been fired. Lincoln has fired Hooker, and he's appointed George Meade. And there are other Confederate generals in the room saying, "Oh, Meade, he's going to be an easy pushover." And Lee looked at them and he said, "Oh, no, he won't."
Yeah.
He goes, "General Meade will not make a mistake in my front. And if I make one, he'll make me pay for it."
Yeah.
And so they finally had a fighting general who wasn't afraid to lose. And I'll share this point here with that. At the end of the war, just before the end of the war, when Lee surrenders to Grant at Appomattox.
Yeah.
Grant was the overall commander of all the Union armies in the different fields, West and South, and, the Army of the Potomac. But he traveled with the Army of the Potomac, where Meade was still the commanding general of that army, but Grant traveled with him. And after the surrender, this army started to mingle. And Meade wanted to go over and see how Lee was doing. He hadn't seen him, of course, in years, because when Meade went to West Point, Lee was the superintendent at the time. So, and they also fought briefly together in the Mexican War before the Civil War.
Right.
And so he goes over to see Lee, and Meade relates the story. He said, "I got down off my horse, and General Lee walked over to shake my hand, and I shook his hand, and he looked at me and he said, 'General Meade, you have a lot more gray hairs than when I last saw you.'" And Meade looked at him and he said, "You're responsible for most of them."
I love it, man. Oh, that's fantastic, man. That is great. I love the stories about Lee that you can't really find in I guess textbooks after the war at the Episcopal Church when they were doing communion.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Tell that story.
Sure. There at the Episcopal Church, he was Episcopalian. He was a born again believer, like Stonewall Jackson was, and of course the Union had their, born again believers as well. And it's just a great testimony how they conducted themselves, as believers in Christ.
Yeah.
And when you think about fighting a war, General Longstreet one time said to General Lee, "They never seemed quite like the enemy." Like in the other wars that they fought, And Lee goes, I know. But anyway, at the end of the war, Lee was attending an Episcopal church, and it was shortly after.
Stripped of his citizenship now. He's officially stripped of his American citizenship.
Yes.
Which is, that's hard.
Yeah. And he was at the service, and it was shortly after these slaves were let free. They were freed, and they're in Richmond. They're in that area, and I actually was in Lexington. So this was the first time that Lee was in a church. I couldn't say this was the first time, but it's very early on after the slaves were released. The slaves now, the African Americans now, were going into churches and some churches they used to have to sit up in the upper level. In some churches, they had a separate building, like a Black Sunday school or something like this. And so in this Episcopal church, they went up to the railing for the Lord's Supper. Okay. And so the time for the Lord's Supper comes, and a bunch of the African Americans just start to go. It's one of their first times they can go in that manner. And none of the white people in the church went up to the railing. And the writer of this article wrote that, and then this elderly gray-haired gentleman got up, walked up to the railing and knelt down next to, there was a space at the railing. He knelt down next to an African-American man. And then slowly, not all of them, but a number of the white people in the church joined them at the railing. And that always just touched me, you know. And
of
Lee
course,
was someone who,
that elderly man, that was General Lee.
Yes, I'm sorry. That's right. Thank you for filling that in. Yes. That was General Lee.
Yeah.
That was General Lee. Yes, indeed. And then you have guys like Stonewall Jackson. Now, you know, in the South, of course, you had plantation owners that were cruel and brutal, and they thought blacks were inferior. They wanted slavery to go on forever. But that was not every Southerner. You know what I mean? And most of the soldiers in the Confederate Army didn't own slaves. You know, the rich plantation owners did. And you had someone like Stonewall Jackson, strong believer, right? He had two young black men that he bought. And the reason that he bought them was he understood that they could end up on a plantation or on a farm where the master or the owner of the farm was not benevolent, not. And so what he did was he bought them, but he looked at himself adopting them, and he would bring them to church with him, and he would build a black Sunday school in Lexington, Virginia.
Wow.
So they all could attend and hear the gospel. Like whenever he rode home when he was out on the battlefields, whenever he rode home, he would give his wife a short report of how things were going on the battlefield. The rest of the letter was, how is the Sunday school going?
Wow.
How are my young men doing? And he looked at it as a discipleship. And after the war, no, actually, this is about, I want to say, 15, 20 years ago. There's a small church attended mostly by African Americans down in Virginia. And it's not a Catholic church, but they had stained glass windows, and they have different sceneries in those things. And one of them is of Stonewall Jackson kneeling down by a riverside. And this newspaper reporter looks at the pastor, and she goes, how can you have Stonewall Jackson? You know, this is at the time they're taking down.
Oh, monuments. Yeah, right. Monuments were all bad back then, yeah.
And so the thing is like, you know, how can you have Stonewall Jackson on your church?
Mm-hmm.
He was a racist. He was a bigot. And the black pastor, he said, oh, no, ma'am. You know, and he was like a descendant of the pastor.
Okay.
You know, and he said, oh, no, Mr. Jackson, he made sure my ancestors heard the gospel.
Wow.
He made sure that they were able to attend church. And they saw a whole different picture of him. And I think one of the shameful things is you have these extremes, right? You have, after the Civil War ends, you have the lost cause. In other words, there's writing about the South where General Lee is like almost like a saint, and all this. So you had that extreme. He wasn't a saint, but he was a believer, and he struggled with like everyone else. He wasn't someone that was for slavery. You know, in fact, he was a military man. The slaves that he had were through his wife, and his father-in-law, when he died, said, I would like to give these slaves their freedom a year and a half after I die. So he followed his father-in-law's wishes, set them free. So I guess what I'm saying is you have the extremes, right? You have like the extreme of every person in the South, they weren't bigots. Well, there were a lot of bigots in the South, you know, and there were lots of cruel plantation owners. But then you have the other extreme. Everybody in the South was a racist. Everyone in the South was for slavery. That's another extreme.
Not accurate, right?
Right. So you have to look at each person individually. What was their story, you know?
It's way more complex than
absolutely
painting with a black and white brush.
Right.
As many, it's lazy intellectualism to just paint with a black and white brush and look at this part of American history and boil it down to everybody was racist. Therefore, they were, if they were part of the South. It's just, that's not the case, man. And it's not the case. It's not the case that everybody in the North was anti-racist.
Exactly.
So it's way more complex. And unfortunately, it's
what you had in the
intellectually
North.
dishonest for people to actually go down that route and
Right.
try to make that case. But
And I think the thing of it is that and I think social media has exacerbated the problem.
it has.
In other words, people don't do their research. They just
No critical
parrot.
thinking, man. There's no.
They
It's
just
parrot.
parrot what they
Let's
hear.
parrot and copy and paste
Right.
what someone else actually put research into,
Right.
and then demand, if you disagree with it, that I'm going to call you names or demand that you agree with me. And if you don't agree with me, I'm somehow you're an evil person.
The bottom line was slavery was wrong. There's no question about that, and we're all glad it's done and over with. But it's we have to look at, how did the people at that time deal with it?
Yeah, man, context.
And they all had different thoughts on it, and
it's a complex context. It's complex, man. It's
sure, even the way they looked at their state, they thought their state was their first loyalty,
right,
and then to their country. So there's a lot of Southerners. Do you know the guy who wrote a series? His name is Shelby Foote. He wrote a classic series on the Civil War. He died in the 1990s, and he was one of the experts on the Civil War. Really, he took 20 years to write these 3 volumes. He did his research. And he was from Mississippi. And they asked him, somebody was interviewing him, they asked him, if you were living in the 1860s, the 1850s, who would you have fought for? And he looked at the interview and he said, I would have fought for the state of Mississippi. He goes, not because I was for slavery, but he goes, like, in other words, you got to remember who you grow up with people, you work with people, you have connections with people. And then something like the Civil War happens, and everyone in your neighborhood is saying, I'm joining the army to defend our home state. And he goes, to not fight for the South would have been to deny all of that. And I thought it was a very good perspective, because right off the bat, he goes, I wouldn't have been fighting for slavery. But in a sense, you can say he was.
Yeah.
But that's not, what he's.
Yeah. States' rights have never actually gained any type of ground back since the Civil War. It's always the federal government has gone like this, and the states have gone like that, and gone.
And
down
that's not healthy.
It's not. It's not healthy at all. You know something? As you were speaking, it reminded me. My father's mother, her maiden name is Jackson, and they're from Virginia, and so I could be related to Stonewall Jackson.
There you go.
Maybe not by blood, but
Well, you're a brother in the Lord with him.
Yeah, well, hey, you know what? You're right, and that's actually better. So it is blood, but the blood of Christ. Which brings me to another conference you're doing. This one is I guess a 2-day. Is it the
2 days and 1 night? Yeah.
And this one's in November. Have you done one in November out in Gettysburg?
I've done. Yeah, it's nice actually. Well, we're not out on the battlefield as much, but the weather is usually nice.
It's early November, so it's right around just past late October when you have Indian summer kicking in.
Like jacket weather, Yeah.
And this is Lincoln and the Gettysburg Address.
It's actually called the Gospel and the Gettysburg.
Oh, the Gospel. Okay, the Gospel and the Gettysburg Address. Well, explain that to me.
Yeah.
When I read the Gettysburg Address, or when I learned it in school, I didn't see the Gospel in there, but apparently the Gospel had some influence on it.
Another one of my favorite guys in history, Abraham Lincoln. I started this back in 3 years ago, and this will be our third trip in this one. And it's, again, November 6th and 7th. And what we do is Lincoln, 4 months after the Battle of Gettysburg, he came to Gettysburg to dedicate the National Soldiers Cemetery that they were going to dedicate there. And so he came there to dedicate that. And he came, and he was in Gettysburg for 23 hours. So our whole conference is 23 hours long. So we try to mimic that. And we started at the train station he came in on, and I, get the little history in the background of that. The place he stayed at is now a museum. The night he was there, he stayed at is now a museum. So we visit that. We also, so what it is that Friday night we go to the train station, we learn about his trip to Gettysburg, why he was coming, and then we go to where he stayed, the hotel where he stayed at. Actually, it was a lawyer's house that he stayed at near the town square. And we tell a little bit about that. Then the night teaching, that first night teaching, is about, the title of it is The Bible's Influence on Abraham Lincoln as a Man and as President.
Mm.
And if anyone's read anything about Lincoln, the man knew the Bible. He revered the Bible, and he quoted the Bible often.
Many people during his time period, that was the school textbook.
Sure.
I mean,
sure.
The Sears catalog. They didn't have YouTube. They didn't have Netflix or Amazon Prime. They had the Bible, man. They had the Bible and Sears, and then later, Montgomery Ward, I guess. But I guess it was Sears first. But before he became a believer, he still could probably quote scripture better than most Christians today.
Yes. Yeah. And what we do on that night is, again, with the title, The Bible's Influence on Him. I mean, Abraham Lincoln, his specific struggles that he battled with depression for most of his life. And the Bible was something he always went to for comfort, for strength, for wisdom. In other words, he went to church. He went to church often as a young adult growing into adulthood, but he never joined a church.
Okay.
So he went to a church, but he never joined a church. And someone asked him why he doesn't join a church. He goes, when I can find a church where people love the Lord their God with all their heart, mind, soul, and strength, and their neighbor like themselves, I'll join that church. And of course, at that point, he's knowing that's, he's not recognizing that that's something that's none of us are perfect in, right?
Yeah. And if any of you listening, if you find that church, guess what? You just wrecked it. It's not a perfect church anymore.
Right.
No longer a perfect church. There is no such thing, except for the one the Lord is going to present at the end of all things. He's going to present us perfect, but we're not there yet. So anyway, keep going. I didn't mean to cut you off.
What I go in it with too is like he struggled with depression, but he also had this belief, and I go into why in more detail when we're there, that he had the mark of Cain, that he himself could have been saved.
Lincoln, wow. Really?
And he struggled with that for a long, long time. Wow. And so, but yet in other words, and because a lot of times when you hear him quote the Bible, he quotes about God's sovereignty and his providence and his power. Mm-hmm. But very early on, and even to the time when he first becomes president, you never really hear him talk about salvation. Mm. And so, but what I believe happens to him, like there's a great story that, when you think about what he went through when he got married, before he was president, one of his young children died, right?
Yes, right.
And then while he was president during the Civil War, another one of his children died at 7 or 8 years old. And then, of course, his wife had her struggles, which added to his struggles. And also you talk about a divided country, right? They were shooting at each other, just about to shoot at each other, and then began to during his presidency, right? I mean, what does it do to the image once you become president, 11 states leave the union?
Yeah, right.
I mean, he never commented on that, but you just, it had to have an impact.
Had to.
He struggled with that. One night he came in looking so depressed that one of the secretaries in the White House, who was good friends with Mary Lincoln, saw him walk by her, go into the parlor and sit down, and just look very down and depressed. And then about a half an hour later, he comes out of the room, and his countenance was much more lit up, And after he left the room, she went in to look at what he was reading. And she knew he had been reading his Bible, but she was curious as to what he was reading. And he had left the Bible open to where he was. And he was in the book of Job. And she said he often spent lots of time in the book of Job. I guess he could relate to that, and how Job felt, and I'm sure Job went through those periods of depression, And so you saw him battling with his faith. So in that teaching at night, I go through that, his life and how Bible influenced him right up to the time at the beginning of his presidency. And then the next morning is the gospel and the Gettysburg Address. I believe that he came to know Christ sometime around the Battle of Gettysburg or after. in his preparation made before the Gettysburg Address or shortly after the Gettysburg Address. And I share some evidence in his last year, some things that he said and what other people said that I think are strong evidence that he did give his life to Christ, you know. And when you look at the Gettysburg Address, there's elements of the gospel, and it's been a fascinating study. I still need to study more about it, that he takes elements of the gospel and uses it in the Gettysburg Address. I mean, the whole idea of the new birth of freedom comes out of born again.
Yeah, right.
You know?
Right.
And he taught, and in that you start to see him moving towards talking about things like salvation. You know, there's the mercy of God, there's the grace of God, there's, you know, and by the time he gives his second inauguration over a year in 1864, right, when he's reelected, shortly, he's only in a few months before he's a couple months, actually 2 months, because they get inaugurated back then in March.
Oh,
and he was assassinated in April.
Yeah.
So,
Ugh.
but in that second inaugural address, you see that there's elements of mercy and there's elements of grace in what he was saying.
There's a distinct change that from
Yes.
earlier on in his writings and
Right.
his speaking.
This program was made possible by the Plays on Word family of supporters. To find out more, check out our website at playsonword.org.